the situation in my motherland.
Steve Rosenberg. Armed violence in Iraq has ebbed, but hundreds of people are still dying every year in
the situation in my motherland.
Steve Rosenberg. Armed violence in Iraq has ebbed, but hundreds of people are still dying every year in
the situation in my motherland.
Steve Rosenberg. Armed violence in Iraq has ebbed, but hundreds of people are still dying every year in
the situation in my motherland.
Steve
destroyed a wedding hall during a large celebration in Al Hamdaniya in late September. 3 of her sons were among more than 130 people killed in the blaze. She reels off a list of others who died. In total, she lost 13 relatives that evening. In the blink of an eye, when the bride and groom were dancing, we heard a flare ignite the ceiling. Everyone was stuck inside with the smoke, black smoke. You couldn't see anything. Nobody could see anyone, she recalls, weighed down as much by grief as by the heavy bandages covering her limbs. People stepped on me with their feet. My grandson carried me outside. Otherwise I would have died too. Overt violence has waned because of poorly applied safety standards. After the blaze, the Iraqi government quickly launched an investigation. Prime Minister Mohammed Shia al-Sudani ordered all relevant authorities to intensify building inspections and checking of safety procedures at shopping centres, restaurants, event halls and hotels. The hall owner was arrested and a handful of government officials were sacked for allegedly failing to carry out their duties properly. The head of Iraq's Civil Defence Force, Major General Mohsen Kazem Alak, tells me that highly flammable cladding had been used to build the privately owned hall. The Hamdaniya tragedy was an accident. It happened because the owner of the hall was in violation of the Civil Defence's requirements, he says. The hall was made from a highly flammable material. Also, there were no exits. The Iraqi government paid for 23 of the most severely wounded people, including Mariam, to be flown on military aircraft to Turkey for treatment, exposing the weaknesses of Iraq's domestic healthcare service, which suffers from underinvestment and corruption. All these cases coming to Istanbul are the most difficult ones, says Dr. Ahmed Al-Tatabi, head of the Iraqi Health Ministry Department, responsible for evacuating patients for treatment abroad. The Ghazi Osman Pasha Hospital is clearly set up for this sort of thing, and a sign in Arabic on an office door at reception reads Operations Room for the Injured of Al Hamdaniya. Having lived through so much violence, Iraqis aren't always prepared for the less obvious risks of daily life. Dr. Ahmed looks slightly exasperated when I ask him about safety standards. Actually, they are not followed by the people, not by the government, he says, leaning over his glass of tea. He claims that accidents often happen in rural areas where standards are slacker. But fires at government buildings in cities have also been fatal. In 2021, during the COVID-19 pandemic, 2 enormous blazes at public Iraqi hospitals killed nearly 200 people due to poorly stored oxygen bottles. An investigation into one of those fires found that again, highly flammable cladding materials were to blame. And again, doctors I spoke to at the time said that the hospitals did not have basic safety measures in place. Back in the Gazi Osman Pasha Hospital in Istanbul, Meryem does not know if she will ever return to Iraq. Her old life there, of big family gatherings surrounded by her children, is gone. Where would I go? Where can I go? She asks. I'd be going back to an empty home.
Lizzie Porter. You're listening to From Our Own Correspondent here on the BBC World Service. I'm Pascal Harter. In Spain, after a period of political deadlock, the Socialist Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, recently won an investiture vote. That means he's been able to form a government and can continue for another term. But his opponents are furious. That's partly because it was actually the right-wing Partido Popular that finished first in the elections, but it couldn't form a majority. Even some of Mr. Sanchez's own supporters are angry. And that's because in order to form a left-wing alliance, he's promised amnesty to members of Catalonia's separatist movement. It's the biggest since the blanket amnesty granted in 1977 for crimes committed under the dictatorship of General Francisco Franco. Mr. Sanchez says it will diffuse tensions in the Catalan region, but critics, including several judicial associations, say it undermines the rule of law. Long-term divisions have also been laid bare, says Guy Hedgecoe.
As police clashed with demonstrators outside the headquarters of the Socialist Party in Madrid one night recently, slogans seemed to be everywhere. Some chanted, others painted on banners. All of them had a similar theme: anger at Socialist leader Pedro Sanchez. But one of the placards being held up was particularly eye-catching. It said, "Welcome to 1936, Part 2. It was a reference to Spain's civil war, which began in that year and ended 3 years later with the defeat of the Republican left and the beginning of the dictatorship of Francisco Franco. The rather sinister suggestion was that the current situation bore comparison to the events of 9 decades ago, and that Spain's left was once again heading for an epic humiliation. Comparing such a bloody civil conflict with contemporary politics may seem over the top, but as Spain has entered what appears to be a major crisis, the ghost of past divisions at times appears to be returning to haunt the country. At the centre of this storm is an amnesty law which Mr. Sanchez has negotiated with Catalan nationalists. He needed their support in Parliament in order to form a new government. So together, socialists and nationalists have drawn up a law that drops all legal action pending against more than 300 Catalan activists and politicians linked to their separatist activity. In many cases, that activity was an unsuccessful attempt by Catalonia to break away from Spain in 2017. Among those who will benefit from this amnesty is Carles Puigdemont, president of the Catalonian region, which made that bid to secede. Who then since. To the fury of many Spaniards, Mr. Puigdemont was closely involved in the negotiations over the amnesty law that will benefit him. The protests outside Socialist Party headquarters have been driven by the amnesty, as demonstrators accuse Mr. Sanchez of agreeing to it only because it guarantees he can remain in power. Spain is no stranger to social unrest, but this wave of protests in Madrid is unusual because of the profile of those taking part, who tend to be middle or upper-class, well-to-do Spaniards. Matilde Izquierdo Ocajo is a lawyer who used to vote for the Socialists, but she's been turning out in recent days to join the protests against the amnesty and Mr. Sanchez, who she thinks is acting illegally. They're taking away rights that were given to us by the Constitution, she told me. We had a dictatorship with Franco, which fortunately came to an end. This may not be a dictatorship, but it's very scary. I don't know where it will lead. Others, mainly on the hard right, do claim that Spain is back in a dictatorship because of Mr. Sanchez and his amnesty, for which they didn't vote. As his investiture vote was taking place in Parliament, vans hired by a right-wing Catholic organisation drove past. bearing fake images of the Prime Minister made to look like Adolf Hitler, and with slogans calling him a traitor. Such scenes arguably work in favour of the newly sworn-in Prime Minister, who claims this is an example of the Spanish right's refusal to accept the legitimacy of left-wing governments. 2 decades ago, there was similar anger on the right when the tax on trains in Madrid appeared to influence the outcome of a general election, and the Socialist Party scored a surprise victory. The often shocking polarisation in Spanish politics fuels the Two Spains theory going back decades, which states that the country's soul is fundamentally and deeply divided between left and right, progressive and conservative, and that little can be done to bring the two sides together. References to the violence of the 1930s make little sense in modern Spain. Yet the dispute over the legality and legitimacy of Spain's amnesty law and its new government is just the latest episode in a long history of antagonism.
Guy Hedgecoe in Madrid. At the start of this month, one of the longest-standing losing streaks in the world of sport finally ended. The Hanshin Tigers baseball team won the Japan Series for the first time in almost 14 years. It ended a woeful run of luck that began after fans mistreated the mascot of an American fast food chain. It was when he studied in the team's home city, Osaka, that Guy Delaunay first saw the team play and became captivated by this strange story.
There's no way around it. I support a baseball team once cursed by Colonel Sanders. Yes, that Colonel Sanders, the jolly white-haired fellow with a beard associated the world over with Kentucky Fried Chicken. Baseball has a tradition of cursed teams. It goes all the way back to the curse of the Bambino, which afflicted the Boston Red Sox for 86 years before they won the 2004 World Series. But the most bizarre jinx of the lot retained its power, the curse of the Colonel. It all started in Japan's second city in 1985. That year, Osaka's favourite baseball team, the Hanshin Tigers, won their first ever national title. But the trouble began when they won the Central League Championship to qualify for the Japan Series. That evening, fans flocked to Osaka's Dotonbori nightlife district to celebrate. Somebody got the bright idea that the best way to honour the team would be to jump in the filthy canal that runs through the middle of Dotonbori. A cheerleader called out each player's number in turn. On cue, one of the crowd who supposedly resembled that team member would lob themselves into the mucky water until they got to number 44. That was the number of the team's star player, Randy Bass. He was a big American batter with sandy hair and a full beard. None of the Japanese fans looked anything like him. Someone spotted the statue of Colonel Sanders standing outside a nearby branch of KFC. The fans decided the resemblance was close enough. The statue was hoisted up and hurled into the murky depths. The Hanshin Tigers won that Japan Series, but that was the end of their winning streak. From being the top team in the country, the Tigers took up residence in the basement of the Central League. I came into the picture about 8 years into this losing streak. I was studying at Osaka University, and the Tigers permeated local life. The city's other team, the Buffaloes, rarely rated a mention, no matter how badly Hanshin were playing, which was very badly most of the time. Still, locals embraced the Tigers. One night, I was waiting to cross the road in front of Osaka's busiest railway station, Umeda. A diminutive elderly man appeared, dressed head to toe in Tigers paraphernalia and brandishing a portable tape player. A tinny rendition of the team's anthem, Roko Oroshi, wafted from the speaker, and as one, the scores of people standing at the red signal raised their voices and sang along. Just as the final salute to the team was complete, the signal turned green, and the crowd walked on with smiles on their lips. The team spirit was perhaps summed up by a hapless pitcher named Tateo Kakuri. He once delivered a fastball, only to have it returned with interest plumb between his legs. Somehow, he completed a throw to first base to get the batter out before collapsing in agony on the pitcher's mound. There was a moment of solemn silence from the commentators. Then, one of them piped up, "Wow, その痛みは男しかわからない. Woof. Only a man can understand that kind of pain. Or, metaphorically, any Hanshin Tigers fan. In August, on a visit to Japan, I took my son to see the Tigers play their fierce foes, the Giants, at Tokyo Dome. And then, unexpectedly, the Tigers won. So, was I the lucky mascot they needed? Hardly. In 2023, they were on a season for the ages, winning the Central League in record time and qualifying for another tilt at the Japan Series. Perhaps the Colonel had something to do with it. The statue, missing a hand, was retrieved from the river in 2009, and since then, the team's fortunes have improved. But in the Japan Series decider, they were facing the defending champions, their Osaka rivals, the Buffaloes. I watched more in hope than expectation. But the Tigers romped to a comfortable 7-1 victory, and just like that, the curse of the Colonel was no more. As if to tempt fate, the fans gathered again on the banks of the Dotonbori Canal, and a supporter dressed as Colonel Sanders was hoisted through the crowd and then lobbed into the water. Luckily, this time, he made it out.
Guy Delorney, at last feeling lucky to be a dedicated fan of the Hanshin Tigers. I'm Pascal Harter. That's it for this edition of the programme. The producer was Polly Hope. And we'll be back next week with more of the real lives behind the news headlines on From Our Own Correspondent here on the BBC World Service.
This is the BBC World Service, where best-selling authors discuss their best-known novels with Harriet Gilbert for World Book Club.
After a while, the characters start talking to you. I know that sounds spooky, but I did write most of this novel at 3 a.m. in the morning with the door slamming in the house.
The Seven Moons of Mali Almeida is a darkly funny satire by Sri Lankan author Shehan Karunatilaka.
You want to ask the universe what everyone else wants to ask the universe. Why are we born? Why do we die? Why anything has to be. And all the universe has to say in reply is, I don't know, idiot, stop asking.
It has ghosts, evil spirits, unscrupulous politicians, even a tragic love affair.
I really thought I was writing a conventional detective story. You have a corpse, you have 5 or 6 suspects, you have a few twists. I mean, the only difference is the corpse is the detective.
Even Agatha Christie didn't think of that one.
World Book Club, Saturday at 12 GMT.
It is estimated today that there's roughly 200 gangs, but there are at least a dozen that are really powerful. 80% of the metropolitan area of Port-au-Prince is controlled by gangs.
In a world of 24-hour news and flash messages on our smartphones, it's hard to stay on top of the stories that matter to all of us. I'm Claire Graham, and I'll be talking to Harold Isaac about earthquakes, political assassination and gang warfare in Haiti in the explanation after the news.
BBC News with Moira Alderson. Hamas has said it's seeking to extend the 4-day truce with Israel that's seen dozens of hostages released from Gaza in return for Palestinian prisoners. The US President Joe Biden has also said his goal is to keep the pause in the fighting going beyond Monday. In a statement late on Sunday, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that after the truce, Israel would return with all its strength to realise the elimination of Hamas. Sunday saw the release of 14 Israeli and 3 Thai hostages on the 3rd day of the temporary ceasefire. 39 Palestinian prisoners were freed in return. Tens of thousands of people have marched through central London to protest against anti-Semitism. Hate crimes against Jews in Britain have soared since the war in Gaza began. The president of Sierra Leone has said the most of the leaders behind an attack on a military barracks and prisons in the capital Freetown have been arrested. He described the events as an attack on democracy and gave no details about the perpetrators. New Zealand's new centre-right government has been sworn in at a ceremony in Wellington. The new Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, has pledged to reverse many policies of the previous Labour government, rolling back the use of the Maori language and its ban on oil and gas exploration. Almost 500,000 people in Russian-occupied Crimea are without power because of a storm raging in the Black Sea. Reports say trees have been brought down and gas pipelines damaged. There's been flooding in coastal areas. The Irish author Paul Lynch has won this year's Booker Prize for fiction for his novel Prophet Song. The work imagines a dystopian Ireland of the future under a totalitarian regime, and it explores explores the plight of a family trying to decide whether to flee or to stay and fight. That's the latest BBC News.
So, how did it happen?
Well, actually, that's a really important question.
The two countries were essentially enemies. That is, of course, an allegation that is being left.
Everybody has a different definition of what the problem was.
Let's remember the background of all this.
This is the explanation from the BBC World Service. I'm Claire Graham, and with the help of my BBC colleagues around the world, I'll be trying to get a better understanding of the stories that matter to all of us. In this episode, why is gang warfare widespread in Haiti? Located between the Caribbean Sea and the North Atlantic Ocean, Haiti neighbours Jamaica to the west and Cuba to the northwest. I'm joined from Haiti's capital city, Port-au-Prince, by journalist Harold Isaac. Harold, thanks for joining us.
All right.
So Harold, Haiti won its independence from France in 1825, but it paid a big price. 100 million francs, approximately $21 billion in today's money. It's estimated that over half of Haiti's population is living in poverty. Is this in some way a legacy of that colonial debt?
For the most part, what it made sure, and this was the long game, if you want, or the long con of sorts, it made sure that it crippled Haiti for the foreseeable future, for a very durable time. It made sure that Haiti would become the poorest country of the Americas, if not one of the poorest countries in the world. It also laid out the foundations and the blueprint for the financial system in Africa, because the same model that was developed in Haiti was eventually used for all what they call the French West Africa
time to rest.
French, and the CFA franc is virtually born out of that logic of what is considered as neocolonialism or neoliberalism. So a new form of imperialism without, physical chains and without guns and other kind of, physical constraints. So
and time
Haiti's
for another beer.
History in the world is a history of struggle.
Many people will associate Haiti in recent times with that earthquake in 2010. Mm-hmm. What was the lasting effect of that earthquake?
The cruel irony for the earthquake that happened in 2010, and there are many points that are ironic with regards to that earthquake. The first is Haiti itself. Haiti bears three names: Haiti, Quisqueya, or Boyo. They all native words because there are many, native people before the arrival of settlers and before the arrival of slaves. Haiti means mountain land, and as such, the very history of the country is a history of tectonic shifts. 95% of the territory of Haiti is mountains. So as such, it has known throughout its geological history earthquakes. The earthquakes that struck Haiti most vividly also had major political consequences. One of them was the earthquake of May 7th, 1842. That led eventually, because back then the island was one country, both Haiti and the Dominican Republic were one country. The Dominican Republic was under Haitian rule at that time. And that earthquake accelerated and led to the birth of the Dominican Republic.
An earthquake just happened, and many people are walking in front of me, and they have blood all over. That was a lady screaming because she lost her son.
In just 35 overwhelming seconds, the earthquake destroyed lives, homes, the heart of Haiti's government.
On January 12, 2010, a massive earthquake struck Haiti, devastating Port-au-Prince and killing over 200,000 people.
The 2010 earthquake happened at the time where Haiti was in a political crisis, a social crisis, an economic crisis. It's a big country physically compared to other, small islands, but it's a small country in terms of the people. So virtually everybody knows everybody. And that day, many folks died. And the country was propelled for the next 10 years in kind of a tailspin.
streets of Port-au-Prince, there was panic and fear. Some casualties were rescued, but others, too many to count, were buried alive beneath the rubble. At the presidential palace, proof of the strength of this earthquake, it wasn't just flimsy buildings which collapsed. The central cathedral caught fire. It now lies in ruins. But it is the human losses which are most shocking. Throughout the night, desperate survivors tried to rescue their family, their friends, in whatever way they could, digging down with bare hands.
Politically, Haiti was in very troubled times and was on the onset of trying a very problematic experience politically with a newcomer that had no experience whatsoever in politics, and that propelled the country in major crises that we're paying the price of until today. When the earthquake struck, one of the major problems that happened at the same time was what would be happening with elections that were set to happen in 2011. And actually, in the end of 2010, for 2011, people were saying, well, you know, the country's traumatized. Yes, there is a president. Back then it was President Preval. His term was about to end. The international community really pressed for elections to happen. President Preval back then, I think, believed that it was necessary, but thought that, you know, we have lost nearly 300,000 people. Are we really going to be in the mindset for elections? What ended up happening, there were serious allegations during these elections about the credibility of the election, whether it was fraud, and one of the main candidates, one of the accusations that was made towards him is that he got bumped up by the international community. He was supposed to be fifth, and then he was brought up to be runner-up, and he ended up winning. And that person was Michel Martelly. He was a singer that has zero political experience, but he came precisely on that mandate, saying that he's different than traditional politicians, he's gonna shake up things. And so there was this wave, you know, what they call the pink wave, that carried him into power.
The hopes of a nation rest on his shoulders. Michel Martelly arriving for his inauguration as Haiti's new president. The pop star turned politician promised a fresh start after the devastating earthquake in January last year. Mr. Martelly is an outsider with no experience of government. His fame and message of change won him the election. But Haiti's faced political upheavals, coups and violence for decades. Overcoming that legacy and rebuilding this shattered country will be a huge challenge.
Initially, because there was a lot of money flowing in, whether it's international aid, whether it's the Petrocaribe loan program from Venezuela, that made an ambience of lavish expenses from the government, which was unusual really for Haiti, because it's not a rich country, but it was in a situation where they didn't have any cap to their expenses. So they could just tap into the loan program and get money and spend it whichever way they wanted to. And then what ended up happening is 5 years went by, almost 4 to 5 years, and we were back at the election cycles in 2016. And he had a problem because he couldn't extend his term, because as per the Haitian constitution, you cannot have 2 consecutive terms as a president. And so he needed to tap someone to run for him in the election. He ended up tapping an entrepreneur called Jovenel Moïse. He initially was considering running for Senate, but it ended up being his choice, his pick for his party, which was the Tetkali Party, which is the bald head party for literal translation. And eventually in 2017, he got sworn in and became president. Jovenel Moïse, as a president, displayed very little regards for institutions and for institutions renewal. During his term, he just let the terms expired for every branches until it got to him. Because in February 7, 2021, his term, in theory, was supposed to be expired. He no longer had a parliament. He no longer had a justice system that was functioning. All the terms had virtually expired. So on July 5th, he tapped current Prime Minister Ariel Henry to replace another ad interim Prime Minister he had, that was Claude Joseph. And literally 2 days later, he got killed.
Haiti is a country in chaos, where acts of everyday life have come to pose a mortal risk. Accused of corruption and extending his presidency illegally, Jovenel Moïse faced mass protests and demands from the opposition to step down. The interim Prime Minister described the assassination, which came after weeks of escalating violence, as a heinous, inhuman and barbaric act, and declared a state of emergency. Still recovering from the devastating earthquake of 2010 and a hurricane that struck 6 years later, parts of the country remain inaccessible, besieged by territorial battles between heavily armed gangs, violence that's forced more than 13,000 to flee their homes. Yet the police have been largely invisible, the government silent. The shooting of the president and his wife, proof that no one is safe.
The assassination of Haiti's president plunged the country into further chaos. The power vacuum created by his death was soon filled by an upsurge in the gang warfare that plagued the region. Do we know how many gangs are operating in Haiti at the moment?
The gang reality was here in Haiti for virtually eons. It's just that they were localized, they were contained, they were not emboldened with powerful weapons and a constant flux of ammunitions coming in, and their territory was very restricted. What happened is the UN mission, the MINUSTAH mission that had been there since 2004, started departing in 2017, 2018, and from that point on, gangs were virtually emboldened in expanding.
Police evicting families from a public square in Port-au-Prince. Many sought refuge here in July when gang warfare killed at least 300 people in 10 days. They've had little help from their failing state. Here's where they fled from, Cité Soleil, a place where most fear to tread. It's the poorest part of the capital and a bastion of the gangs. The UN's World Food Programme has to negotiate its way in to give out life-saving aid. It says 19,000 people here are facing famine-like conditions, a 2-hour flight from Miami.
The gang problem is ongoing in Haiti. And some people argue that gangs are as old as the country itself, because it's all about local folks deciding that they are imposing their own rules to certain neighborhoods, certain areas. It is estimated today that there's roughly 200 gangs, but there are at least a dozen that are really powerful. So it's considered that 80% of the metropolitan area of Port-au-Prince is controlled by gangs. What happened is during the term of Jovenel Moïse, the UN mission, the MINUSTAH mission that had been there since 2004, started departing in 2017, 2018. Gangs were sprawling throughout the city. And essentially, they broke into two major movement. One is called the G9, infamously known internationally for its gruesome methods and atrocities and massacres. And then on the opposite side, you have the GPEP, which contains, folks like Izo and Timakak and Vitalam and whatnot. And these gangs have been in turf wars with each other, but their methods are different. Some are more specialized into kidnapping, some are more specialized into racketeering businesses and whatnot.
Gang warfare often erupts here in broad daylight. Why not? Gunmen are in league with corrupt politicians and have some police on the payroll. This is gang territory in Port-au-Prince, almost as far as the eye can see. But it seems the world isn't looking. It's morning in a middle-class suburb. Minutes after a shootout, a show of force by the police. But usually it's the gangs who call the shots. And the Haitian capital has become a gangster's paradise.
Some of the gangs try to give themselves some sort of a political agenda. You're going to fight against powerful people and whatnot. But this is the narrative they sell to folks that they need to use as a support system. And then eventually, when they grow, they need more weapons, they need more ammunition, and then they turn into full-blown criminals that need to kidnap or racket businesses so that they can supply themselves with weapons. But that narrative has been challenged with an incident that happened in Port-au-Prince where a group of alleged gangsters fleeing from the old stronghold of T-Macaque, which is a gang leader that has been confirmed killed by the police. They were fleeing and they got caught at a police stop, and then a violent mob came and lynched and burned them to death. That sent shockwaves because the gangs had a sort of invincibility veneer where they expanded their territory, taking over new territories, and it felt like there was no end to it, and that they would just expand forever and just take over the whole country and kick everybody out, you know. But that was challenged, and automatically many neighborhoods in the capital started to challenge them with machetes, with rocks, and it's very gruesome scenes, but it was a reaction to their expansion and a challenge to their rule. Because a new player got onto the field, and it's called the Sovereign People. It's vigilante justice, and that has shaken the very foundations of the gangs.
How does Haiti get out of this? Does it need an international intervention?
Haiti is facing a complex set of crises, whether it is natural disaster, whether it's sanitary crisis with the cholera resurgence, whether it's a political or social economic. So for everyday folks here in Haiti, it is a challenge. And being here by itself is an act of resistance, you know, considering all the woes that Haitians have to face. We have everything to thrive, right? It's just that we're lacking opportunities. We're lacking a support to do things. The matter of the international intervention has been very polarizing in Haiti. However, with the intervention of, you know, what we call the Sovereign People, it showed that, you know, when cornered, the population will react, and it will be unpredictable, and it will be without mercy. And in reality, those who are expressing this rage or this disapproval, you know, of gangsterism, they just want to live. They want to go to school. They want to make a living. That's what they're looking to do. And that's where perhaps they need help.
You've been listening to The Explanation from the BBC World Service. I'm Claire Graham, and my guest was Harold Isaac. The producer was Owen McFadden. To hear more editions, search for The Explanation wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hello and welcome to More or Less from the BBC World Service. We're your weekly guide to the numbers in the news and in life, and I'm Kate Lamble. Today, we're all about a girl looking at a film and asking it to accurately represent women and the jobs they do.
My name is Veronica Carlin, and I am currently the Director of Learning at Elder Research.
Force would come charging up and rescue me.
Romantic comedies, rom-coms. We're talking Pretty Woman that you just heard, When Harry Met Sally.
My favorite rom-com is absolutely Crazy Rich Asians.
So your family is like rich?
We're comfortable.
That is exactly what a super rich person would say.
It's a modern take on Cinderella, but what I love about it even more is that she is an economics professor who specifically studies game theory.
And for Veronica, there's one thing she loves about rom-coms.
Typically and historically, when women are in films, they are secondary characters, and they're there to advance the plot lines of the male characters. However, in romantic comedies, because the female is the lead, there's a lot of complexity to her. So we see her friendships evolve, her career, things that she likes, and things that are unique to her specifically that have nothing to do with any other characters in the movie. And that really is unique to romantic comedies as a genre.
So it matters to Veronica what kind of jobs they do.
That's even there in one of the very first rom-coms, Bringing Up Baby from 1938, starring Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant as a bumbling, aloof archaeologist.
I hope you realise that you've made a perfect fool of yourself in front of everyone. Have you finished?
Yes, I have.
Thank you very much.
But that scientist role is almost always a man. So Veronica had a hunch that there wouldn't be a lot of rom-coms where the lead woman was a chemist or doctor or engineer. And being a data scientist, she set to work figuring out what was going on. In the rom-com of this story, we have a montage here. Veronica checking spreadsheets in a fabulous outfit, drinking frothy coffee and typing frantically on a computer.
First, I had to identify what it means to be in STEM. STEM really bleeds into a lot of other fields. So is someone in agriculture in STEM, right? Like there's growth patterns and biology that's associated, but is farming STEM?
She used a National Science Foundation report to pin down the job definitions and the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers to work out the percentages.
Of the entire U.S. workforce, 23% of the workforce is STEM and 8% is female.
8% of the whole US workforce is women in STEM. Now, Veronica is just interested in women in the workforce because we're just talking about female lead characters here, who make up 48% of the workforce in the US. So you slightly more than double that 8%.
So, if everything is equal, then in theory, 16.5% of all rom-com movies should have some lead role in a STEM position. So, you know, if we produce 100 movies, either 16 or 17 of them should have a female lead that's a doctor or, you know, a research scientist or a data scientist.
Then she used the Internet Movie Database, IMDb, to identify all the US-made rom-coms.
So I didn't want to compare women from 1950 in these roles if that wasn't really representative of women in STEM roles. So I had to make a cutoff, and that was 1990 to 2019. There were over 200 films, 249 to be exact, in my data set.
And she just had to go through each film and identify how many lead women had jobs in STEM. So how many were there?
Only 12 of them. And so to be clear, remember we said that if we had 100 films, then 16 or 17 should have been women in STEM. We have 249 here. And so we're only getting 12 films with women in STEM, and that is significantly below the number of women in STEM in the real workforce.
That ratio seems off, but Veronica wanted to absolutely nail it down.
In stats, we have this thing called statistical significance, and what that means is
time for another montage.
And so that was determined based on what's called binomial distribution. And so for the binomial distribution, we have to then determine a p-value. In statistics, a p-value. And in this case, I had a p-value of significantly below 0.05. What that means in layman's terms is essentially there is no way that this happened by chance, at least not in a probable way.
If you're wondering, the most popular job for a heroine in a rom-com is a writer or journalist. But trust me, there is not that much romance going on in More or Less Towers. Nevertheless, this analysis warmed our cold hearts. But, I mean, romantic comedy portrays unrealistic image of modern life is hardly a surprise. So does it really matter? According to Veronica, it is particularly important to get STEM representation right. In the 1990s, The X-Files was a very popular TV show, with agents Mulder and Scully getting caught up in all kinds of adventures, often including aliens. Surveys of women who work in STEM years later found that Scully, a strong female character, had been a role model for them. Seeing her on screen had helped increase their interest in science and technology.
This was called the Scully effect because Dana Scully was one of the two main characters who really thought about logic, reason, and she was a medical doctor, and she had this profound influence on women. And so since rom-coms are typically targeted to female audiences, seeing more women in STEM roles in these types of films could have that same type of effect on young women going into the workforce or in women deciding to change careers.
But maybe there are signs that things are changing. Just last month, a new rom-com came out called The Other Zoe. It features a computing student who gives up their over-rational preconceptions and finds love.
You have to go after what you want and be brave. Oh my god, you're just giving me rom-com advice now.
No, it's so fun. So it is now a woman playing out the stereotype of a scientist who, through the power of love, learns how to have fun and embrace life. We might have to wait a little bit longer for a fun, free-spirited scientist in a rom-com who can teach their love interest how to have a good time. Thanks to Veronica Carlin, whose research was first published in an essay called How to Lose a Girl in 2 Standard Deviations, published by Significance magazine. And that's all for this week. If you see any stats you'd like us to take a look at, you can get in touch by emailing more-or-less@bbc.co.uk. In the meantime, we will always have Paris. Goodbye.
This is the BBC World Service, where In the Studio explores the creative process of the world's greatest artists.
Join me, Bongani Kona, as I go behind the curtain with marvelous Damon Galgut to find out how his Booker Prize-winning novel, The Promise, has been adapted for the stage.
In the Studio at bbcworldservice.com/inthestudio. In half an hour, it's time for some happy news.
Meet the war veteran from Texas who's graduated from high school 60 years after he left. The comic book that's helping to educate girls all over the world about menstruation, and a British cat's new Christmas song. I'm Harry Bly.
The newsroom is next. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Is that an Abby amused?
At 1 o'clock GMT, this is the newsroom with Nigel Adderley. The truce between Israel and Gaza is heading into a 4th day. But will it be extended? The Israeli military are ready to resume their pursuit of Hamas.
The Israeli Defense Forces continue to prepare to fight. The Chief of Staff approved plans for the continuation of the war.
Also coming up, the families of 3 Palestinian students shot in the US state of Vermont want the incident investigated as a hate crime. New Zealand's new coalition government has been sworn in. And could Robert Kennedy Jr. disrupt next year's US election for both sides?
He's attracted this group of people from both parties, people who are just anti-establishment in general, which is very funny because he arguably comes from one of the most establishment families in American politics.
You're listening to the BBC World Service. First, the top stories.
Hello, I'm Moira Alderson with the BBC News. Hamas has said it's seeking to extend the 4-day truce with Israel that's seen dozens of hostages released from Gaza in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. After a phone call between US President Joe Biden and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, both men agreed they would continue working to secure the release of all hostages. Lucy Williamson is in Jerusalem.
The Israeli government all along has been very clear that once the deal comes to a final end, then the war will resume. But the deal does include provision for an extension of the kind that Hamas seems to be outlining. And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did signal that he was also open to that sort of extension. He talked about a framework that says you can release 10 more hostages every day. That's a blessed thing, he said. He also told President Biden that at the end of that framework, we'll return with all our strength to realise our goals.
Sunday saw the release of 14 Israeli and 3 Thai hostages by Hamas. One of them, 84-year-old was in critical condition after her health was seriously neglected during her captivity. Another of those freed was 4-year-old Abigail Edan, a dual US-Israeli national. President Biden said she was in Americans' thoughts as she had been through a terrible ordeal.
2 days ago, one of our fellow Americans, a little girl named Abigail, turned 4 years old.
She spent her birthday at least 50 days before that held hostage by Hamas. Today, she's free. Jill and I, together with so many Americans, are praying for the fact that she is going to be all right.
Israel freed 39 Palestinian prisoners in return. The governor of the American state of Vermont, Phil Scott, has said that the shooting of 3 students of Palestinian descent should not incite more hate or divisiveness. Police said the 3 men, all aged 20, were visiting the city of Burlington for the Thanksgiving holiday when they were shot. They are not critically injured. The president of Sierra Leone, Julius Maada Bio, says most of the leaders of Sunday's attack on a military barracks and prisons in Freetown have been arrested. In a televised speech, he said calm had now been restored. More from Mayani Jones.
Mr. Bio said calm had been restored in the West African nation, but he gave no details about who the perpetrators were nor what they wanted. He also didn't say what happened to the escaped prisoners. According to the authorities, the city's main prisons were attacked by gunmen, leading the armed forces to make a tactical retreat to protect civilian lives. They claim some prisoners were abducted by the assailants, while others were released. A military barracks near the presidential palace was also targeted early on Sunday morning. The political situation in Sierra Leone has been tense since June, when President Maada Bio was re-elected after narrowly missing a runoff.
Mayani Jones reporting. World News from the BBC. An Africa-based religious charity says that a German missionary kidnapped a year ago in Mali has been freed by Islamist militants linked to Al-Qaeda. Father Hans-Joachim Laura was seized in the capital Bamako. No details are known about the circumstances of his release. Father Laura has lived in Mali for 30 years, teaching interreligious dialogue at a mixed Islamic-Christian institute. Almost 500,000 people in Russian-occupied Crimea are without power because of a storm raging in the Black Sea. Forecasters warned of heavy rain and winds of up to 130 kilometres an hour. Further north in Ukraine, the storm has brought heavy snow. New Zealand's new centre-right government has been sworn in at a ceremony in Wellington. The National Party won October's elections, but needed the support of 2 smaller right-wing parties. Phil Mercer reports.
More than 6 weeks after a general election, New Zealand finally has a new government. It's been sworn in at a ceremony in Wellington. The Prime Minister Christopher Luxon leads a centre-right coalition with the Libertarian ACT New Zealand Party and the populist New Zealand First. It intends to repeal a ban on offshore oil and gas exploration, as well as cutting income taxes. There are plans too to scrap tough tobacco laws that aim to make New Zealand smoke-free. Mr. Luxon said the legislation would have fueled an illicit trade in cigarettes.
The Irish author Paul Lynch has won this year's Booker Prize for Fiction for his novel Prophet Song. The work imagines a dystopian Ireland of the future under a totalitarian regime. Paul Lynch has said he was inspired to write the book by the Syrian refugee crisis. In his acceptance speech, he thanked all the children of this world who, he said, needed our protection, yet had lived and continued to live through the terrors depicted in the book. That's the latest BBC News.
1:06 GMT, you're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Nigel Adderley. There are strong and encouraging signs that the truce between Israel and Hamas, due to end on Monday, could be extended. The deal has allowed the 2 sides to swap hostages and prisoners and commercial aid into Gaza. In the latest exchange, Hamas had 17 hostages, 14 Israelis and 3 Thai nationals, while Israel freed 39 Palestinian prisoners. Our correspondent Orla Gurin sent this report from Tel Aviv.
Rejoicing in Israel after the darkness of recent weeks. The latest group of hostages freed from Gaza wave to supporters as they are welcomed home. Emily Hand embraced by her father, Thomas, who at one stage believed her dead. Now she is free and, he says, doing well.
Yeah, yesterday we finally got Emily back from the hands of the Gazan terrorists. She's lost a lot of weight from her face and body, but generally doing better than we expected.
Hello.
Emily's family say they will throw her the biggest birthday party ever.
I think
she
in the
turned
end,
9
you should
in
have
captivity.
freedom of choice, even if that
Abigail
means you die
Idan
sooner.
has also been freed. Joe Biden had been pushing for her release. The 4-year-old is American-Israeli. Hamas killed both of her parents. Also back in Israel, Yafa Adar. Since coming home, she has learned her grandson is a captive. Her granddaughter says she is back from hell, strong as ever.
Her spirit is still there, and she's still looking all of us in the eyes, and she's still showing us that she wouldn't let them break her. And she's telling us how she thought about us and about the great grandkids at night when it became tough. And she's saying she could hear their voices calling her, and that she said, okay, I have to push through, I have to do whatever it takes to be back.
Also coming home, Palestinians in their teens, freed from Israeli jails.
We Manchester, hello.
Many children are detained by Israel, the occupying power, on charges of throwing stones. In the West Bank, they got a hero's welcome. The green flag of Hamas flying high. In Gaza, the truce is holding among the ruins. More than 14,000 Palestinians have been killed, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Many in the international community fear what's to come if Israel's bombardment resumes.
Paula Goering. Hamas has said it's seeking to extend the 4-day truce, and Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has signalled he's open to it. He referred to the fact that the deal allows for an extension and described the gradual release of hostages as a blessed thing. But Mr. Netanyahu is under pressure from the military not to let the pause drag on too long, and has said Israel will eventually go back to war with full force. One of his biggest allies, US President Joe Biden, is keen for the truce to continue.
This deal is delivering life-saving results. Critically needed aid is going in, and hostages are coming out. This deal is structured so that it can be extended, to keep building on these results. That's my goal, that's our goal, to keep this pause going beyond tomorrow. Nothing is guaranteed, and nothing is being taken for granted. But the proof that this is working and worth pursuing further is in every smile and every grateful tear we see.
Our correspondent in East Jerusalem, Lucy Williamson, says an extended truce would be welcomed by Palestinians.
I think that will come as welcome news to many people in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, not just because it means more Palestinian prisoners released from Israeli jails, but also because of the sense of kinship that many people feel with people in Gaza and concern for the situation there. Israel has put restrictions on many of the families who are receiving people back from jails, saying they shouldn't hold celebrations, they shouldn't talk to the media, but there's very little mood for big celebrations as it is, because people have told us they do feel anger and sadness at the situation in Gaza. We spoke to one mother in the West Bank this week who was waiting for her son to come off one of these coaches from the Israeli jail, and she said she felt conflicted about what Hamas had done. On the one hand, she said, it brought her son back to her. On the other hand, it caused the devastation in Gaza.
Lucy Williamson. The ongoing conflict between Israel and Gaza has heightened tensions around the world. In the United States, there's been a spike in Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. In Burlington, Vermont, 3 US college students of Palestinian descent were shot and injured on Saturday night. They were visiting for a Thanksgiving holiday gathering. A statement from the victims' families said all 3 were graduates of the Ramallah Friends School, a private Quaker school in the West Bank, and they urged the law enforcement to investigate the attack as a hate crime. The assailant is still at large. A reward of $10,000 has been offered by the Council on American Islamic Relations. Our Washington correspondent, Shingai Nyoka, gave me the details.
Well, according to Burlington Police, 3 young men were taking a walk out on a Saturday evening, and a white man who didn't say anything, approached them and then opened fire, firing 4 rounds, wounding the 3. 2 of them are in a stable condition and 1 is seriously injured. They haven't yet discovered what the motive is, but they say that this could possibly be a hate crime. 2 of the 3 students were wearing the kufiya, the Palestinian scarf, so they believe that that could have prompted this particular attack. We understand that the 3 students were of Palestinian descent. 2 of them are US citizens and the other one is a legal resident.
And has there been a spike in anti-Semitism or Islamophobia in the United States since the attacks on October the 7th?
Well, there has been. The American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee put out a statement and they asked authorities to look at this as a hate crime because they say that the men were targeted because they are Arab. Obviously, investigations are still going on. The suspect hasn't yet been arrested. But they say that there has been an unprecedented surge in threats against people of Palestinian and Arab origins. And the FBI would concur. It said a few weeks ago that there had been an unprecedented rise in the threats against Jews as well as Islamophobia.
And just finally, we see here in London marches on a weekly basis now, either in support of the Palestinians or against anti-Semitism. Is it a similar picture across the United States?
It's very much a similar picture, and I think that's where some of the tension has arisen, especially on the college campuses with student bodies that are very politically active. And at one particular march where there were clashes between the 2 groups, 1 man died when during the clashes he fell and hit his head in Chicago. Unrelated to all of this, a 6-year-old Muslim boy was killed, stabbed 26 times, and authorities have charged his former landlord, but they believe that this was also a hate crime. And so while all of this might seem thousands of kilometers away, it's having a real impact here on the relationship between those that support the Palestinians in Gaza and those that support Israel.
Chinga Nyoka. To Sierra Leone now, where what's been described by its president as a breach of security and an attack on democracy took place on Sunday morning. Others have described it as an attempted coup. A military barracks came under attack in the capital Freetown and prisons were overrun. Gunfire was heard across the city and an overnight nationwide curfew is now in place until further notice. In a televised address, President Julius Maada Bio said the country was now calm, but advised everyone to be vigilant and cooperate with the security forces.
The attackers have been repelled by a combined team of gallant security forces, and calm has been restored. Most of the leaders have been arrested. Security operations and investigations are ongoing. We will ensure that those responsible are held accountable through due process.
Our correspondent Umaru Fafana is in the capital Freetown.
In Freetown, it all started at a military barracks called Wilberforce, which is literally walking distance from the president's residence. And then some soldiers broke into the armory. The shooting continued elsewhere by the same attackers who were in various parts of the capital, and then they went to the eastern outskirts, and there was heavy shooting in a place called Juwe, which has an armed police barracks. And then the internal affairs minister told me that they also attacked a police barracks where he said that they seized arms and ammunition. In the country's 2 main prison facilities, the attackers went there and then they set free all the prisoners, thousands of them. And then they went to the female prison and released all the female prisoners. I saw at least 2 sets of prisoners walking with them in handcuffs, and they were roaming all over the place. And that was exactly what made a lot of people wake up to take seriously the whole of today's development. All we know is some soldiers went into this military barracks and then seized the armory. I'm told that at least a dozen others were by the president's lodge, apparently waiting for signal from their colleagues from the barracks. And then some presidential guards got wind of it and they came down and more or less warded off that apparent attack that was building towards the president's lodge. The government is there referring to them as bandits and as rogue elements. It bears the hallmarks of an attempted military coup. And And I've got to say that it may be quiet right now, but nobody is certain. Probably beneath the veneer of quietness belies some untoward intent we don't know. So there is real angst here across Freetown.
Umar Fafana. 1:17 GMT, you're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. Now to the US, where an unexpected intervention in the form of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. could disrupt a potential Biden-Trump rerun in next year's presidential election. RFK, as is known, is from America's most revered political dynasty, the Kennedys. His uncle was President John F. Kennedy, his father, Robert Kennedy. Both, of course, were assassinated. Now, age 70, he's standing as an independent candidate. RFK is anti-vaccine and embraces issues ranging from radical environmentalism to conspiracy warnings usually associated with the Trumpist right. The BBC's James Knox has been investigating if Robert F. Kennedy Jr. could have an impact at the polls, and his report starts in 1968, when RFK's father decided to run for the White House.
I am announcing today my candidacy for the presidency of the United States. I run because I am convinced that this country is on a perilous course, and because I have such strong feelings about what must be done, and I feel that I'm obliged to do all that I can.
Bobby Kennedy's campaign lasted only a few months. He was assassinated the night he won the Democratic primary in California in June 1968. More than half a century later, sounding so much older than his father, who was 42 when he died,
Welcome to the stream.
RFK Jr.
My mission over the next 18 months of this campaign and throughout my presidency will be to end the corrupt merger of state and corporate power that is threatening now to impose a new kind of corporate feudalism on our country.
It doesn't have quite the youthful flavour of his father's crusade, but this is a campaign that's producing poll figures in some states of well over 20% for Kennedy, figures that are particularly alarming for Joe Biden, because as things stand, Donald Trump, despite 91 criminal charges, a fraud trial and months of courtroom drama ahead, is chasing the president hard, and even in some polls, leading in a few of the half-dozen states that will probably decide the election a year from now. The Kennedy campaign is also, strangely, alarming his family, one of his sisters describing him as a danger to America. Maura Judkis of the Washington Post.
People who know him believe he believes everything that he says. There are a few members of the family that support him. Many of them have spoken out in public against him. His views could affect their reputations. Many of them work for the administration that he is trying to unseat. He's attracted this group of people from both parties who like him either because they're very anti-vaccine or because they were opposed to the leadership of Dr. Anthony Fauci, who led the COVID response here. People who are anti-war because he doesn't support the U.S. aiding Ukraine. People who are just anti-establishment in general, which is very funny because he arguably comes from one of the most establishment families in American politics. Crypto guys, environmentalists. It's a really motley crew.
Well, a year out, voter surveys are just a finger in the wind. But I asked John Zogby, one of America's preeminent pollsters, to try to make sense of it.
3 out of 4 U.S. voters don't want President Biden or former President Trump to even run, which means there's kind of a wide open field. And then the field becomes even wider when you poll 18 to 44-year-olds, where Kennedy actually leads nationwide.
So, if he keeps this up, he's likely to damage both the Democrat and Republican candidates, but probably one rather more than the other.
He could actually become competitive and even possibly win a state or two. But right now, I would have to say that the impact would probably be greater on Joe Biden. And that means he holds the presidency in the balance as of now.
John Zogby ending that report by James Naughty. Now sport with Andy Barwell.
And tributes have been paid to the former England, Australia, Tottenham Hotspur and Barcelona football manager Terry Venables, who's died at the age of 80. Well, the news came before kick-off in the Premier League game at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, where Spurs' current boss Ange Postecoglou shared his tribute to Venables.
Terry probably embodies more than anyone else what this club is really all about. It's not just about wins and losses. It's about the way you carry yourself. It's it's the way you approach the game and approach life. It's a sad loss for him and his family.
Well, the match saw Tottenham suffered a third successive Premier League loss in going down 2-1 at home to Aston Villa, who went fourth in the table, now only 2 points off the leaders Arsenal. Villa's boss is Unai Emery.
After we lost in Nottingham Forest, was very important. Try to recover here, playing like we played, being very consistent in our game plan, defensively, offensively, and then of course sometimes we needed the goalkeeper, we needed the tight offsides. That is, but in 90 minutes already was very, very intense.
Manchester United went top six. United were 3-0 winners away at Everton, and it featured a goal of the season contender.
It's deep towards the edge of the penalty area. Oh, what a goal! That is absolutely sensational from Garnacho. A bicycle overhead kick that found the top corner.
Well, in Spain, Real Madrid went to the top of La Liga thanks to a 3-0 victory at Cadiz. The Brazilian forward Rodrigo scored twice. England midfielder Jude Bellingham added a third, his 13th goal of the campaign. While Real Madrid are now a point ahead of Girona, who have a game in hand. Meanwhile, Sergio Ramos was sent off for the 29th time of his career. It also extended the 37-year-old's awful record for the most red cards in La Liga history to 21, as Sevilla were beaten 2-1 by Real Sociedad. In a clash between the top two in the Serie A, the leaders Inter Milan remain 2 points clear after drawing one apiece away at second-place side Juventus. Italy have won just their second Davis Cup tennis title, and Red Bull's Max Verstappen ended the most dominant season in Formula One history with a victory in the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix.
Andy Barwell. A traditional Maori song at the start of the swearing-in ceremony for the new centre-right coalition government in New Zealand. It follows weeks of negotiations and political uncertainty. The National Party won the largest share of the vote in last month's general election, but needed the support of the libertarian ATC New Zealand Party and the populist New Zealand First Party to form a working government. Here's the new Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon.
Public service is a tremendous privilege, because what it comes with is a government of relatively few people making sure that they are there each and every day to improve the lives of Kiwis. So I ask that you think about that as we work together to improve this great nation of ours. We now have a responsibility to deliver for New Zealanders, to give them clear, demonstrable and measurable improvements in the quality of their lives.
Our correspondent Phil Mercer is live on the newsroom. And Phil, how difficult was it for the major political personalities involved to come together?
Well, it's 45 days since New Zealanders voted in a general election. Under the country's proportional representation voting system, the major parties often need the support of smaller ones to form a government. So for, well, more than 6 weeks, the Prime Minister-elect Chris Luxon, who leads the National Party, as you say, they had the biggest share of the vote as far as individual parties were concerned. But he had to engage in many hours, days, weeks of negotiations with those two smaller parties, and also bringing together different personalities with different ideologies and different ambitions. And crucially, he has the support of one of New Zealand's most combative and controversial politicians, Winston Peters, who will have first to go, if you like, at being Deputy Prime Minister in the new administration. The leader of the ACT New Zealand Party will take over the role after 18 months. So much horse trading, but finally New Zealand has a brand new government.
And will there be any big changes in policy?
We're getting the impression that the new rightward-leaning government in New Zealand will take an axe to the previous government's policies. There will be a plan plan to repeal a ban on offshore oil and gas exploration, as well as cutting income tax. There are plans too to scrap tough tobacco laws that had aimed to make New Zealand smoke-free. So the New Zealand government under Chris Luxon getting straight to work, and we do expect some fairly major legislative reforms.
Phil Mercer, thank you. This year's Booker Prize for works of fiction published in English has been awarded to the Irish writer Paul Lynch. His novel, Prophet Song, follows one woman's attempts to save her family in a dystopian island, sliding further and further into authoritarian rule. Our culture editor Katie Razzle was at the award ceremony.
The winner of the Booker Prize is Prophet Song by Paul Lynch.
4 years in the writing and one night that will change his life.
It is with immense pleasure that I bring the Booker home to Ireland.
Prophet Song is an unsettling book set in an island which is descending into authoritarianism. Last week, his home city, Dublin, saw violent street rioting.
I was in a book signing on Thursday night and a lady came up to me in the queue and she said, "Have you seen the news?" And I said, "No," and she said, "Your book's becoming real." That evening, when I got back to the hotel, I saw those images and I was astonished. You know, I'm just an observer, I'm just a novelist, but it's not hard to see what it could lead to.
Novelist Essie Adujan chaired the judges.
It's kind of a timely novel, given what's going on in the world right now, but it also had a kind of timeless quality to it, where we felt that this was a book that would endure and continue to speak to many generations about the perils of totalitarianism.
When A.S. Beyer won the prize for Possession, she said she'd spend the money on a swimming pool. For Paul Lynch, nothing so luxurious. With interest rates rising, he says he'll use the £50,000 on his tracker mortgage.
Katie Razzle reporting on Prophet Song, the winner of the Booker Prize for this year. You've been listening to the Newsroom on the BBC World Service with me, Nigel Adderley. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Thanks for joining us. In an hour, Crowd Science finds out if our brains respond differently to listening to books.
There's research that suggests we're much more likely to mind wander when we are listening auditorily than when we're reading in print.
Then it's People Fixing the World.
We're talking about a problem that affects millions of people across the world. Period poverty. We'll meet the women working to reduce the inequality and stigma surrounding menstruation.
And at 4:30 GMT, The Conversation speaks to two women from this year's BBC 100 Women list.
Women and the environment have been oppressed in the same way. They have rights. They need to be, listened to. They need to be upheld. They need to be protected. They need to be part of decision making, as it were, particularly women when it comes to environmental issues.
You have all that to come on the BBC World Service.
Coming up in the Happy Pod from the BBC World Service, we meet the man from Texas who left high school to join the US Navy. 60 years later, he's attended his graduation. A comic book that started in India that's now helping educate girls all over the world about periods and menstruation. And an impressive renewable energy record set by Portugal. I'm Harry Bly. Join me for half an hour of uplifting news stories from around the world after this news summary.
BBC News with Neil Nunes. Hamas has said it's seeking to extend the 4-day truce with Israel that's seen dozens of hostages released from Gaza in return for Palestinian prisoners. President Biden has also said his goal is to keep the pause in the fighting going beyond Monday. But after a phone call with him, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu restated his position that after the truce, Israel would resume fighting with the goal of eliminating Hamas. Sunday saw the release by Hamas of 14 Israeli and 3 Thai hostages. 39 Palestinian prisoners were freed in return. The governor of the U.S. state of Vermont has said the shooting of 3 students of Palestinian descent should not incite more hate or divisiveness. Police said the 3 men, all aged 20, were visiting the city of Burlington for the Thanksgiving holiday. They are not critically injured. The president of Sierra Leone, Julius Maada Bio, has said that most of the leaders behind an attack on the military barracks and prisons in the capital, Freetown, have been arrested. He described the events as an attack on democracy, but gave no details about the perpetrators. New Zealand's new centre-right government BBC. Reports speak of trees being brought down and flooding in coastal areas. And the Irish author Paul Lynch has won this year's Booker Prize for fiction for his novel Prophet Song. The work imagines a dystopian Ireland of the future under a totalitarian regime. BBC World News.
Mike Phillips never finished high school in the 1960s. With the help of his girlfriend Mary Jane, he's just attended his graduation at the age of 77.
That was probably the best surprise that I ever got in my life.
But on the way there, he says, "Now, I don't want any surprises. Make sure there are no surprises." And I thought, oh, brother, boy, am I in trouble.
Hello, I'm Harry Bly, and in this edition of The Happy Pod, meet Nicola from England. She makes pottery for people with disabilities.
It just seems to have been that people don't want a medical aid, they just want to sit and continue to enjoy drinking their cuppa.
Her work went viral online and now she's helping hundreds. Aditi Gupta wrote a comic book in 2014 to teach girls about periods. Now Menstrupedia is used all over the world. And we hear the impressive clean energy record set by Portugal. All that and more to come on The Happy Pod.
And I'm on the chat with the little Happy Pod.
Pod. P-O-D.
You got me. Hello, this is Mike Phillips, and I'm listening to the Happy Pod.
That's lovely.
And I'm from Dickinson, Texas.
That's right. This is The Happy Pod from the BBC World Service. Let's begin in Texas, in the town of Dickinson. George Michael Phillips, or Mike as he's known, is 77 years old. He left Dickinson High School in the 1960s at the age of just 17 to enlist in the US Navy, where he went on to serve in Vietnam. He had a successful career, but there was always one regret. He hadn't graduated from high school. His old friend, now girlfriend, Mary Jane Music, who later became a teacher at the school, made it her mission to fix this. She found Texas Education Code 280251, which allows school districts to issue diplomas to military veterans. And she hatched a plan. I've been speaking to both Mike and Mary Jane. She began by telling me how they met up again after 60 years.
We went to a mutual classmate, high school classmate's funeral, and realized that we were high school classmates. And I asked him if he ever played putt-putt golf. And he said, yes. So I said, well, we need to go sometimes. And we did. So we've been dating for about 5.5 months.
Wow. And you were both at high school together in the 60s. Can you first tell us a story about why you didn't graduate?
Well, it was, Vietnam was just going on then, and I said, well, I just need to join the Navy and go see what I can do. So I ended up quitting school and went in the Navy, and I ended up on a 36-foot wooden boat going up and down the river in Vietnam.
And Mary, 60 years later, you're the reason that this came together, that Mike graduated at the age of 77 with a high school diploma. Can you tell me about that story?
Well, he would tell me my biggest regret is that I didn't graduate from high school. He got his GED from the Navy. When he got out of the Navy, he worked on a police officer certification. And he would say, but yet my biggest regret is that I didn't get a high school diploma. And that just really bothered me because he was so accomplished in so many areas of his life. It just didn't make sense that he didn't have this high school diploma. So I decided to get online and look, and I found an application for veterans who did not complete their high school diploma to be able to apply for it and receive it. And so I wrote a letter to our school district, and it all came to fruition.
And you went back to Dickinson High School to receive your diploma, and it was quite a ceremony, wasn't it, Mike? Can you tell me about that?
Well, first off, I got there under the impression that the school board was recognizing some of the veterans that went to school there just for Veterans Day. My diploma, that was all kept secret. I didn't know any of it. this lady, the superintendent, she stood up and she asked the veterans to stand, and there was about 5 or 6 of us there. And then she started talking, and we all sat down, and the next thing you know, she keeps talking, and I'm looking, she's talking about me. And next thing you know, she's calling me up, and she's handing me my high school diploma, and then I got the cap and gown. They had students there from the high school band that played
Pomp and Circumstance.
Pomp and Circumstance for it. And after I done that, there's one thing she asked me. She said, "Was you crying?" And I said, "I may not have been crying, but I had big old tears rolling down my eyes." That was probably the best surprise that I ever got in my life.
But on the way there, he says, "Now, I don't want any surprises. Make sure there are no surprises." And I thought, oh, brother, boy, am I in trouble.
I think one thing that Mary Jane said like this proves is you don't ever get too old to accomplish something. To me, it's a great feeling.
And Mike, what would you say to someone who perhaps is in your position, who also served in Vietnam or perhaps another war, who wants to do the same? What would be your advice to them?
Go for it. You know, if you can get that, you know, like I say, if you want that diploma or whatever you want, just go for it. Don't say that, you know, it's a pass and you can't get it done, because Mary Jane showed that it can be done.
We honestly are hoping that young high school students will say, gee, I can accomplish this as well, because sometimes it gets tough. Times are hard. It can be done. We want Mike to be looked at as a model for getting that high school diploma, that it's never too late.
Dickinson High School, class of 1965, 2023 graduate Mike Phillips, and the woman who made that possible, Mary Jane Musick. We have talked about coral reefs a few times on this podcast. We've heard from scientists around the world who are coming up with innovative ways to protect corals from the threats posed by climate change. In July, we spoke to the Australian marine biologist Tim Lamont, who introduced us to the array of sounds you can hear on a healthy coral reef.
When we listen with a special underwater microphone, we hear all sorts of weird and wonderful noises on a healthy reef. So first you'll hear this sort of background crackle. It sounds a bit like radio static or like bacon frying in a pan. And what it is it's the sound of thousands of snapping shrimp, all clicking their claws. Some fish make sort of chattering sounds. Others make whooping sounds. Others buzz or grunt or hum or bellow. There are so many sounds that we're struggling to come up with words to describe them sometimes.
Tim and his team found that playing these sounds to dead coral reefs entices back fish and the nutrients they bring with them. Today's story is across the South Pacific Ocean, off the coast of Ecuador. A team of scientists have identified 2 enormous and healthy cold water reefs located far deeper than the ones we usually hear about. These reefs were found in the waters surrounding the Galapagos Islands, known for their vast and unique range of wildlife. These reefs were spotted and investigated by an underwater remotely operated vehicle, or ROV, named Solastio. I spoke to the expedition's chief scientist, Kathleen Robert.
So the ROV is a very big robot. It has these 2 robotic arms and a camera in the middle. And then we are at the surface of the vessel in a mission control room where we have 2 or 3 ROV pilots. So one person that will fly the ROV, so control the thrusters, and then one other person that will control the arms when we actually need to sample, because we often cannot tell what the exact species of an animal is just by the video. So we need to have a sample of that species so we can look under the microscope as well as take genetic samples.
Wow, and so the ROV goes down to the bottom and it found these deep water coral. Describe that moment for me when you discovered them. What was that like?
It's always quite exciting. We start seeing a few isolated patches. They're orange and they grow a little bit like a bush. They're quite beautiful, and there's quite a few other species that tends to live on them. And so usually we end up seeing a few patches on boulders as we get to the right depth, which is around 400 meters. We start to see a few colonies, and as we would go up, and we start seeing more and more, and around 350 meters, then the whole seafloor was covered with these corals. It's very much like walking in the understory of a forest. So all the bushes would be your corals, and then as you zoom in to there, you'd see all the different organisms. You see fish of all kinds of colors. We saw a few different species of sharks, as well as skates, and then a whole lot of crabs, spot lobsters that tend to climb at the top of these corals and extend their arms to try and capture food.
Let's talk about the discovery and why is this important? We often hear about the demise of coral reefs and coral bleaching due to warm waters. So what does this discovery mean?
So what's really interesting about this discovery is it extends what we know about cold water corals across the world. Obviously, it's very expensive to send ROVs down to hundreds of meters. And so we don't necessarily know all the conditions, the environmental conditions in which these corals can thrive. And so being able to find other corals in other places helps us understand a little bit more about the range of environmental conditions that they can survive in, the kinds of temperatures they can survive in. And that allows us to better understand in the future, as the ocean is changing, what might happen to these corals. And what's interesting about the Galapagos is it's been a marine park for decades now. And so they are in really good condition.
Kathleen Robert. Here in Britain, a potter has developed specially modified mugs for people with disabilities. Nicola Swan started making ceramics on a potter's wheel just 8 years ago, and recently she was inspired by a friend's husband who struggled to hold a typical looking ceramic. She's hoping to make to individuals' needs. After posting a video of her initial design to social media, Nicola receives hundreds of messages every day with requests for special mugs. She's now turned it into a business.
When I was contacted by a friend of a friend, we worked together to come up with a double-handled mug for her husband. I believe he had Alzheimer's and he was drinking out of a plastic sippy cup because she could only find very medical-looking cups. So I corresponded with them what they were actually looking for and came up with a double-handled mug with lowered handles so he could put a silicone lid on it for when he needed to use a straw.
But there are others too, aren't there? You've made more specialist mugs for individual needs.
Yes, so because I put that one out on my accounts, the next thing was a friend got in touch saying her dad really likes that mug, but he doesn't want another handle that's really obvious. So I kind of it was like almost like a little block on the side that he could rest on top of his second hand to give him the stability because he had a tremor. And then really it's just come from people approaching me, having seen what I've made for other people, saying I've got this problem, or occupational therapists have come into my live streams when I've been on social media describing what some of their issues they've got with some of their patients, and worked with people to come up with different ideas.
And a video of your pottery went viral on social media in April with more than 800,000 views. What's that been like?
So yeah, it seems to hit on different platforms all at the same time, because some of these mugs I've been making for a couple of years. I was just part-time potter, working in my studio and putting things in the shop, and I always said I'll always have these in alongside my other mugs, so if anyone ever comes across me and wants one. But then they just started selling out, going off on the social media. And I couldn't keep up. I was making them day and night, and I'd list them and they'd sell out in under 10 minutes.
What's the furthest that you've reached around the world?
It had gone global. I've had people contacting me from Australia. There's a lot of people in America that have been asking, all over Europe. It just seems to have been that people don't want a medical aid. They just want to sit and continue to enjoy drinking their cup out, like somebody may just have weak weakness in their arm and not have a condition such as Alzheimer's or dementia that wants the dignity of just drinking out of a mug like everybody else.
And you can see Nicola's mugs on her Instagram page, Made with Mud. Coming up in this podcast.
Check me out, check me out. My name is not around the TikTok sensation.
The cat from England who's vying for this year's Christmas #1. Welcome back. Portugal has set a new record for running off renewable sources of electricity. For 6 consecutive days at the start of November, the entire country was powered by wind, solar and hydropower. More renewable energy was produced than was actually needed by households and industry, with some being exported to neighbouring Spain. I spoke to our correspondent in Lisbon, Alison Roberts.
Well, in fact, there's now quite a long tradition of investing. First of all, in hydroelectric power. There are a lot of fast-flowing rivers in the highlands that make that possible. And more recently in onshore wind power, and now increasingly in solar power as well. There are even combined projects such as floating solar plants on the reservoirs that were created by a hydroelectric dam, so sort of getting a win-win approach there. And now the investment is probably going to go into the more expensive but also larger offshore wind projects. They're just going to start doing that now. There are also various pilot projects in tidal and wave power. There have been various experiments, not all of which have gone as well as they might want them to, but it's certainly been a consensual strategy in recent decades. In fact, the last coal-fired plant shut down 2 years ago, a little later than expected initially, and that was making Portugal only the 4th European Union member state to wind up coal altogether.
So what has Portugal done and the Portuguese government done to make this possible?
Way back in 2016, the entire country managed to rely on renewables for 4 days. Just in February of this year, there was a weekend when the country didn't use any non-renewable electricity. And in fact, in 2018, for the whole month of March, overall, over that month, Portugal produced more power from renewables than it needed over the month. So that was the first time that that had happened. So there is definitely a consensus here in Portugal that this investment needs to continue.
Alison Roberts. Portugal is very ambitious when it comes to going green. As well as closing its coal power stations, as Alison mentioned, there are also plans to close all its natural gas power plants by 2040 and double the country's solar and hydrogen energy capacity, with the hope of becoming carbon neutral by 2050. Pedro Amaral Jorge is the president of the Portuguese Renewable Energy Association, APREN. He's optimistic about the country's continued push for renewables.
Portugal, because it's a very narrow discipline between wind, water and sun, we are always with a huge amount of renewable resources to be converted into electricity. So I think it's highly likely that we will continue to grow in the incorporation of renewable energy and electricity generation. And of course, if we do this properly, and I'm betting my professional life that we would be able to make sure that we create this compound of renewable energy sources that will allow us not only to generate electricity, but also green hydrogen and synthetic or renewable fuels of non-biological origin. So I'm really, really positive.
Pedro Amaral Jorge. Billions of women around the world have periods, but it's not something that's often talked about. In various cultures, religions and societies, menstruation is seen as a topic that should be avoided, whispered about, or even a taboo. This leaves many women and girls around the world uneducated and unsure about their own period cycles, ashamed to ask questions, and unaware of how to practice safe hygiene. One project that is addressing this stigma head-on is the Indian comic book series Menstrupedia. Its creator, Aditi Gupta, has spent nearly a decade demystifying menstruation in her country and beyond. Lorna Aqua has been finding out more.
This is a story about 3 friends who are going to learn about an important...
This is the sound of a cartoon that's reached millions of people in India.
So open your mind and keep your ears alert.
It's the creation of Aditi Gupta, who, like many women, grew up in a society deeply affected by menstrual stigma.
none of the girls menstruating would know why do periods happen, what happens during our periods, but everybody seemed to know that this is something that you don't have to talk about. A huge part of it is used as a control mechanism. It is used in all societies really. Any fluid that comes out of a woman's body is seen as a taboo. So I grew up looking at myself like that, and periods were always very limiting for me.
Sharing these experiences with her husband while at university made them realise two things: how little they knew about menstruation and how much needed to change.
Tuhin and I are communication designers. We are studying how design can change human behavior and make them feel comfortable about a certain topic or a certain function.
They settled on comics, and that's how Menstrupedia was born. The first comic was published in 2014. I got Aditi to talk me through its characters and how they're filling the menstrual knowledge gap in India.
Menstrupedia comic book! Yes, Pinky. This comic book explains everything about periods in a very...
So we have Pinky, Jia and Meera. So these characters really represent three reader segment. One who has not gotten her periods and she is curious about growing up. One who gets periods during the narrative of the book, so that the readers come to know what to do when they get their periods. And then we have Meera, who has been getting her periods and then she has certain misconception, and through her the readers come to know what are the myths and misconceptions.
Let me answer all your questions one by one. Every month.
That's Priya Didi. She's a doctor in the cartoon and the driving force, educating Menstrupedia's characters and readers.
We also talk about little bit about how to take care of cloth pad if you're using a cloth pad. We are talking about what to do when you get your periods in school, how to dispose these napkins, and how to keep yourself clean on a regular basis when you're on periods.
These comics started out as physical books that have now been distributed to more than 25,000 schools across the world. They've also been animated into cartoons, available on YouTube in 17 languages, including some of India's most spoken languages, like Hindi and Gujarati.
Welcome to the stream. Right now, 13 different countries publish and print Menstrupedia comic in their own language, and the characters look like them. Like, for example, the book that is in Shona language in Zimbabwe, the characters look like them. And in Shona language, I think it is the only piece of literature that is on menstruation. Right now, those girls who are reading the comic book are growing up and they are teaching the junior girls in their class about menstruation. The whole shift in collective wisdom is something that is very fascinating for me, and I'm so grateful to live this life where I could see this change happening.
Everyone faces a bit of inconvenience during periods. So always help each other out and take care of each other.
Lorna Aqua speaking to Aditi Gupta. You can hear more stories about tackling period poverty by searching for BBC People Fixing the World online or wherever you get your podcasts. She's a ginger cat from Stevenage in England who's risen to online fame recently after being photographed hundreds of times in her favourite spot, the ticket barriers at the local train station. But now Nala's fame could be about to go to a new level because her owner has produced a song using her noises, or meows, and is hoping to get the coveted Christmas #1 spot in the UK music charts. The song even got the attention of our friend, the DJ at BBC Radio 2, Scott Mills.
Stevenage train station has hired itself a new ticket officer. She's called Nala. She's a cat, and the commuters are getting a bit obsessed. So much so, one of them has made a song about her, and I won't lie, it's quite good. The song is called Meow, in case you're wondering. Nala just sits on the top of the ticket barrier. There is a rap in it as well. Who's that? That's not the kind. I'm more famous than you. I like checking tickets. Show me your rail cards too. I mean, worse has got to Christmas #1 before.
Andrew Peach has been talking to Nala's owner, Natasha Ambler.
She did loads of adventures beforehand, but now it's particularly at the train station. She gets all the attention, so she just goes there now.
Okay, and like any 21st century influencer, you think, okay, people like taking my photo at a railway station. How am I going to branch out into other areas of show business? Maybe I could learn to sing and release a single.
Yeah, no, it's just a really funny thing because obviously she's been quite in a few countries now, so a lot of people know about her. So we thought, why don't we just make a Christmas song and make some money for charity, and we can give back even more to the community.
No, that's just too big a leap. My cat is popular with people at a local railway station. Maybe we can release a Christmas song. How did that happen in your mind?
Yeah, honestly, everything's just happened so quickly, and it's been so overwhelming. But we thought, yeah, let's just see what's out there. Let's just try it and see if we can make some money for.
So how did you go about, thinking, well, how can we put this music together? Who did that for you?
Funny enough, we have a mutual friend, so we contacted a producer, and he contacted a songwriter, and they were all on board, and yeah, they produced what we've produced today. We didn't want something like a particularly Christmassy song. We wanted a feel-good, upbeat, catchy, feel-good, happy song that everyone could sing along to, or yeah, just a little feel-good.
Check me out. Patrolling down the Stevens station.
Natasha Ambler speaking to Andrew Peach about this music featuring train station loving Nala the cat. And that's all from us for now, but the Happy Pod is back next Saturday. This edition was mixed by Matt Hewitt. The producer was Anna Murphy. The editor is Karen Martin. I'm Harry Bly. Until next time, goodbye.
This is the BBC World Service discussing another best-selling novel.
The Sri Lankan author Shehan Karunatilaka joins me to talk about The Seven Moons of Mali Almeida.
People ask, how many drafts did you do? And I continuously draft, so it's a hard question, but I do remember finishing a draft and throwing it away and starting again 3 times.
World Book Club, Saturday at 12 GMT. In 30 minutes, Crowd Science with Anand Jagatia.
What's the difference between reading a book and listening to one? Do our brains process the information in the same way? And do we actually remember things just as well if we listen to a book instead of reading it?
The Newsroom is next. This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
At 2 o'clock GMT, live from London, this is Nigel Adderley with the Newsroom. Israel and Gaza are heading to the final day of their truce, which has seen Hamas free hostages and Israel release Palestinian prisoners. But can it be extended? US President Biden is hopeful.
That's my goal. That's our goal, to keep this pause going beyond tomorrow. Nothing is guaranteed, but the proof that this is working and worth pursuing further is in every smile and every grateful tear we see.
We hear from both sides of the conflict and also report on the shooting of 3 Palestinian students in the US state of Vermont, which their families want investigated as a hate crime. And Prophet Song, a dystopian novel from Irish author Paul Lynch, wins this year's Booker Prize.
It's kind of a timely novel, given what's going on in the world right now, but it also had a kind of timeless quality to it, where we felt that this was a book that would endure.
You're listening to the BBC World Service.
Hello, I'm Neil Nunes with the BBC News. Hamas has said it's seeking to extend the truce with Israel that's seen dozens of hostages released from Gaza in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. President Biden has also said he wants to keep the pause going beyond Monday so all captives can be brought home. But after a phone call with him, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu restated his position that after the truce, Israel would resume fighting with the goal of eliminating Hamas. Noor Orech is a Palestinian analyst.
There are indications that such an extension is possible. We know that the agreement reached through the Qatari and Egyptian mediation allowed for such an extension. So it was built into the agreement. But the question still remains. The drumming of war has not stopped, and that's what concerns humanitarian organizations and ordinary people in Gaza.
Sunday saw the release by Hamas of 14 Israeli and 3 Thai hostages. One of those freed was 4-year-old Abigail Idan, a joint U.S.-Israeli national. Both of her parents were killed in the October the 7th attack. Her grandfather, Carmel, was overjoyed at her release but lamented the loss of her parents.
It was wow. I couldn't believe it until I saw her. I simply could not believe it. Now I'm a bit more relieved. Not completely relieved because the happiness is mixed with missing Abigail's parents, Roy and Hadar.
Israel freed 39 Palestinian prisoners in exchange. The governor of the U.S. state of Vermont, Phil Scott, has said the shooting of 3 students of Palestinian descent should not incite more hate or divisiveness. Police said the 3 men, all aged 20, were visiting the city of Burlington for the Thanksgiving holiday. They are not critically injured. Here's Shingai Nyoka.
Burlington police responded to a shooting at 6:30 local time Saturday night. The victims included 2 U.S. citizens and a resident. The authorities said that without speaking, a man opened fire on the trio. They're looking into a possible motive, but say 2 of the victims were wearing the black and white keffiyeh Palestinian scarves. A search for the suspect is underway. The American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, ADC, called on authorities to investigate this as a hate crime, believing that the men were targeted because they are Arab.
U.S. defense officials say a U.S. Navy warship has responded to a distress call from a tanker that was seized in the Gulf of Aden off the Yemeni coast. They say the Israeli-linked chemical tanker and its 22 crew are now safe. A maritime security firm said Iran-backed Houthi rebels had previously threatened to attack the ship. World News from the BBC. Sierra Leone's President Julius Maada Bio says most of the leaders of Sunday's attack on the military barracks and prisons in Freetown have been arrested. In a televised speech, he said calm had now been restored to the nation. President Maada Bio did not say who the perpetrators were. Almost 500,000 people in Russian-occupied Crimea are without power because of a storm raging in the Black Sea. Reports say people are being evacuated from villages near Sevastopol after a river burst its banks further north in Ukraine. The storm has brought heavy snow. New Zealand's new centre-right government has been sworn in at a ceremony in Wellington. The National Party won October's elections but needed the support of 2 smaller right-wing parties. The new Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, has pledged to reverse many policies of the previous Labour government. We get more details from Phil Mercer.
Christopher Luxon is a former airline boss and wants to bring that corporate expertise into the political sphere. The cost of living, that was a significant issue in the election. In response to that, the Luxon government intends to cut personal income taxes. There'll also be an attempt to repeal laws that have banned the offshore exploration of oil and gas. Also a plan to landmark legislation that aimed to make New Zealand smoke-free by 2025.
The Irish author Paul Lynch has won this year's Booker Prize for fiction for his novel Prophet Song. The work imagines a dystopian Ireland of the future under a totalitarian regime and explores the plight of a family deciding whether to flee or to stay and fight. Paul Lynch has said he was inspired to write the book by the Syrian refugee crisis. BBC World News.
2:06 GMT, you're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service with me, Nigel Adderley. There are strong and encouraging signs that the truce between Israel and Hamas, due to end on Monday, could be extended. The deal has allowed the 2 sides to swap hostages and prisoners and let crucial aid into Gaza. In the latest exchange, Hamas handed over 17 hostages, 14 Israelis and 3 Thai nationals, while Israel freed 39 Palestinian prisoners. Our correspondent Orla Guerin sent this report from Tel Aviv.
Rejoicing in Israel after the darkness of recent weeks.
The latest group of hostages freed from Gaza wave to supporters as they are welcomed home. Emily Hand embraced by her father, Thomas, who at one stage believed her dead. Now she is free and, he says, doing well.
Yeah, yesterday we finally got Emily back from the hands of the Gazan terrorists. She's lost a lot of weight from her face and body, but generally doing better than we expected.
Emily's family say they will throw her the biggest birthday party ever. She turned 9 in captivity. Abigail Aidan has also been freed. Joe Biden had been pushing for her release. The 4-year-old is American-Israeli. Hamas killed both of her parents. Also back in Israel, Yafa Adar. Since coming home, she has learned her grandson is a captive. Her granddaughter says she is back from hell, strong as ever.
Her spirit is still there, and she's still looking all of us in the eyes, and she's still showing us that she wouldn't let them break her. And she's telling us how she thought about us and about the great-grandkids at night when it became tough. And she's saying she could hear their voices calling her, and that she said, okay, I have to push through, I have to do whatever it takes to be back.
Also coming home, Palestinians in their teens, freed from Israeli jails. Many children are detained by Israel, the occupying power, on charges of throwing stones. In the West Bank, they got a hero's welcome. The green flag of Hamas flying high. In Gaza, the truce is holding among the ruins. More than 14,000 Palestinians have been killed, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. Many in the international community fear what's to come if Israel's bombardment resumes.
Ola Gary. Hamas has said it's seeking to extend the 4-day truce, and Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has signalled he's open to it. He referred to the fact the deal allows for an extension and described the gradual release of hostages as a blessed thing. But Mr. Netanyahu's under pressure from the military not to let the pause drag on for too long, and has said Israel will eventually go back to war with full force. One of his biggest allies, the US President Joe Biden, is keen for the truce to continue.
This deal is delivering life-saving results. Critically needed aid is going in, and hostages are coming out. And this deal is structured so that it can be extended, to keep building on these results. That's my goal, that's our goal, to keep this pause going beyond tomorrow. Nothing is guaranteed, and nothing is being taken for granted. But the proof that this is working and worth pursuing further is in every smile and every grateful tear we see.
Correspondent in East Jerusalem, Lucy Williamson, says an extended truce would be welcomed by Palestinians.
I think that will come as welcome news to many people in the West Bank and in East Jerusalem, not just because it means more Palestinian prisoners released from Israeli jails, but also because of the sense of kinship that many people feel with people in Gaza and concern for the situation there. Israel has put restrictions on many of the families who are receiving people back from jails, saying they shouldn't hold celebrations, they shouldn't talk to the media, but there's very little mood for big celebrations as it is, because people have told us they do feel anger and sadness at the situation in Gaza. We spoke to one mother in the West Bank this week who was waiting for her son to come off one of these coaches from the Israeli jail. She said she felt conflicted. She said it caused her son. On the other hand, it caused the devastation in Gaza.
Lucy Williamson. The ongoing conflict between Israel and Gaza has heightened tensions around the world. In the United States, there's been a spike in Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. In Burlington, Vermont, 3 US college students of Palestinian descent were shot and injured on Saturday night. They were visiting for a Thanksgiving holiday gathering. A statement from the victims' families said all 3 were graduates of the Ramallah Friends School, a private Quaker school in the West Bank. And they urged law enforcement to investigate the attack as a hate crime. The assailant is still at large. A reward of $10,000 has been offered by the Council of American Islamic Relations. Our Washington reporter Shingai Nyoka gave me the details.
Well, according to Burlington police, 3 young men were taking a walk out on a Saturday evening, and a white man who didn't say anything, approached them and then opened fire, firing 4 rounds, wounding the 3. 2 of them are in a stable condition and 1 is seriously injured. They haven't yet discovered what the motive is, but they say that this could possibly be a hate crime. 2 of the 3 students were wearing the kufiya, the Palestinian scarf, so they believe that that could have prompted this particular attack. We understand that the 3 students were of Palestinian descent. 2 of them are US citizens and the other one is a legal resident.
And has there been a spike in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in the United States since the attacks on October the 7th?
Well, there has been. The American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee put out a statement and they asked authorities to look at this as a hate crime because they say that the men were targeted because they are Arab. Obviously, investigations are still going on. The suspect hasn't yet been arrested. But they say that there has been an unprecedented surge in threats against people of Palestinian and Arab origins. And the FBI would concur. It said a few weeks ago that there had been an unprecedented rise in the threats against Jews as well as Islamophobia.
And just finally, we see here in London marches on a weekly basis now, either in support of the Palestinians or against anti-Semitism. Is it a similar picture across the United States?
It's very much a similar picture, and I think that's where some of the tension has risen, especially on the college campuses with student bodies that are very politically active. And at one particular march where there were clashes between the 2 groups, 1 man died when during the clashes he fell and hit his head in Chicago. Unrelated to all of this, a 6-year-old Muslim boy was killed, stabbed 26 times, and authorities have charged his former landlord, but they believe that this was also a hate crime. And so while all of this might seem thousands of kilometers away, it's having a real impact here on the relationship between those that support the Palestinians in Gaza and those that support Israel.
Shingai Nyoka. And as we mentioned there, London this weekend has seen separate marches in support of a ceasefire in Gaza and also against anti-Semitism. Britain, along with the United States and other countries, has seen a rise in hate crime against Jews since the Israel-Gaza war began. Organisers called Sunday's rally the largest gathering against anti-Semitism in London since the 1930s. Stephen Silverman is director of the campaign against anti-Semitism, and he said the UK was a peaceful, multicultural society.
The message is that the UK is a tolerant, diverse place where all minorities and ethnicities are accepted. Anti-Semitism does not represent the values of the United Kingdom, and this is an opportunity for the Jewish community to stand alongside its friends and allies from other faiths and of none and say, no, we will not accept the kind of anti-Semitism that has been seen on our streets for the best part of 2 months.
2:15 GMT, you're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. To Sierra Leone now, where what's been described by the president as a breach of security took place in the early hours of Sunday morning. Others have described it as an attempted coup. A military barracks came under attack and prisons were overrun in the capital Freetown. Gunfire was heard across the city and a nationwide curfew was in place until further notice. In a televised address, President Julius Maada Bio said most of the leaders had been arrested while investigations were being carried out.
Fellow Syrians, in times like this, we are reminded of the importance of national unity. Let us not succumb to fear or division. Let us come together as one people, one nation. Our strength lies
Justice Madabiu carefully avoided calling today's events an attempted coup. He described them instead as a breach of security and an attack on democracy. But for many, the unrest in the capital, Freetown, will be seen as an attempted military takeover. Mr. Bio said calm had been restored in the West African nation, but he gave no details about who the perpetrators were nor what they wanted. He also didn't say what happened to the escaped prisoners. According to the authorities, the city's main prisons were attacked by gunmen, leading the armed forces to make a tactical retreat to protect civilian lives. They claim some prisoners were abducted by the assailants, while others were released. A military barracks near the presidential palace was also targeted early on Sunday morning. The political situation in Sierra Leone has been tense since June, when President Madabiu was re-elected after narrowly missing a runoff. International observers condemned inconsistencies and a lack of transparency in the vote count, as well as acts of violence and intimidation. In August, a number of soldiers were arrested and accused of plotting a coup against the president. 4 West African countries are currently under military rule after a series of coups, including neighboring Guinea.
Eddie Jones. A traditional Maori song at the start of the swearing-in ceremony for a new centre-right coalition government in New Zealand. It follows weeks of negotiations and political uncertainty. The National Party won the largest share of the vote in last month's general election, but needed the support of 2 smaller right-wing parties to form a working government. Here's the new Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon.
Public service is a tremendous privilege because what it comes with is a government of relatively few people making sure that they are there each and every day to improve the lives of Kiwis. So I ask that you think about that as we work together to improve this great nation of ours. We now have a responsibility to deliver for New Zealanders, to give them clear, demonstrable and measurable improvements in the quality of their lives.
Our correspondent Phil Mercer told me how the coalition agreement had been reached.
Well, it's 45 days since New Zealanders voted in a general election. Under the country's proportional representation voting system, the major parties often need the support of smaller ones to form a government. So for, more than 6 weeks, the Prime Minister-elect Chris Luxon, who leads the National Party, as you say, they had the biggest share of the vote as far as individual parties were concerned, but he had to engage in many hours, days, weeks of negotiations with those 2 smaller parties, and also bringing together different personalities with different ideologies and different ambitions. And crucially, he has the support of one of New Zealand's most combative and controversial politicians, Winston Peters, who will have first to go, if you like, of being Deputy Prime Minister in the new administration. The leader of the ACT New Zealand Party will take over the role after 18 months. So much horse trading, but finally New Zealand has a brand new government.
And will there be any big changes in policy?
We're getting the impression that the new rightward-leaning government in New Zealand will take an axe to the previous government's policies. There will be a plan to repeal a ban on offshore oil and gas exploration, as well as cutting income tax. There are plans too to scrap tough tobacco laws that had aimed to make New Zealand smoke-free. So the New Zealand government under Chris Luxon getting straight to work, and we do expect some fairly major legislation.
Og i virkeligheden gå ind ligesom og appellere.
Peugeot partner.
I te uwagi.
Shop Macy's Cyber Monday specials for big savings on gifts they'll love, now while supplies last. Like 50 to 65% off.
This is A-Rant from Blood and Brutality. You're listening to Metal Live Radio.
You are listening to Metal Live Radio.
level 12. Her cop car is full of people.
job, so we can go and try and find out. So, listening versus reading. How are they different in the brain? And is one better than the other?
Language is a very complex processing that involves basically many different brain regions.
This is Fatma Deniz. She's a computational neuroscientist at the Technical University of Berlin. She's researched how the brain responds to reading versus listening to stories using a brain imaging technology called fMRI.
It was previously, before we did this study, unclear if the brain represents spoken and written semantic information, and with this I mean the meaning of the words basically in different ways or in similar ways in the brain. And we showed basically that meaning, in fact word meaning, is represented very similarly in the brain when you listen to words in a story or in a text, or when you read the same text.
So how did you go about investigating this? What was the experiment?
Boy, that was close.
Basically, you can imagine this as taking pictures of your brain across time while you are listening to a specific story. And during reading, the words were presented in one at a time at the center of a screen. So you were reading in a serial manner, and the listening was put through the audio recording. And we, in fact, matched the timing between the listening and the reading words. So we knew specifically when the people were reading the specific words of the story. And for the listening, we were able to get this information as well with cross-processing. And I think our experiment can be, or the process in general, can be broken down into several steps. We collect first the brain activity while people listen and read into stories. Then we do a very specific coding of meaning of each specific word that was presented in the stories using modern machine learning techniques.
Fatma and her team recorded activity in 70,000 brain locations while monitoring the participants. They then mapped the coded meaning for specific words onto these areas of activity in the brain.
Once we map this, we interpret which semantic concepts are represented in each specific location during listening and reading. So we have to, in some ways, collect this information in a meaningful way and visualize and interpret the results.
So when you talk about coding the kind of semantic content of these words, is it that if you have a word like cat, like horse, they'll have certain elements in common because they're both about animals, and so the meaning of a word can kind of be broken down in different ways? You're sort of mapping out what the meaning of the word across different dimensions, and then you're relating that to different words when you see the activity in the brain?
Yes, absolutely. So you can think about it this way. Our brain sorts words according certain categories in some ways. When we hear and read words like mother, family, husband, right? These are more social related concepts. These are activating or relating in fact in the word space already, in the meaning space, they are related. And we can see this from the natural language processing already. But also in the brain, we found out that those are related in the regions that they are engaging. And we somehow connect these words basically in our mind. Exactly as you said.
I mean, were you surprised by this? Because what I find interesting is that, reading is something that has only kind of emerged in our evolution relatively recently. So our kind of neural architecture is set up really for speech. And yet actually, it's almost like our brains have co-opted something that was already there to extract meaning from written words, which haven't been around for that long. So that's kind of surprising to me.
I agree. It was also surprising for us. That's why we actually wanted to look into this. I mean, it's two-sided in some ways. We do see differences between reading and listening in a more sensory levels. Let's say, obviously, when you're reading, you have a visual input. When you're listening, you have auditory input. These first incoming information into your brain are processed in those specific locations, that are more specialized for, let's say, auditory processing versus visual processing. But after that, there's all sorts of intermediate level information that we're also still trying to tackle, that are more and more converging finally in the step which we looked at more exactly between the meaning of the words, right? In some ways, what you're saying is correct. It's surprising that we will assume reading and listening is maybe so similar, but on the other hand, after also seeing our results, we realized when you read a concept about love and beauty, or when you listen to this, you do organize this in quite similar ways, right? And this is basically at the end what we have been seeing.
He saw in front of him what he thought was a large island, but as he came close, he could see it was an enormous whale. And he wanted to know what was inside this whale. So he waited until the whale gave a big yawn and he slipped in on his kayak. He tied up the boat to an enormous tooth that he found there. And then he got off his kayak and began to walk down into the belly of the whale.
So to answer Michael's question, Fatma's study suggests that when it comes to semantics, or the meaning of words, like kayak or whale, the brain processes spoken and written words in similar ways. Fatma's latest research is looking at people who have difficulties with reading, such as dyslexia, and whether listening to a book might be a useful alternative for learning. This brings us to the other part of Michael's question. Do we remember more information if we read something or if we listen to it?
All of the evidence suggests that when we're reading in print, we put far more effort into trying to figure out what's going on.
This is Naomi Barron, Professor of Linguistics at American University in Washington, D.C. Her research shows that the written word is best for retaining information, because reading is a more active process.
It's not surprising that comprehension tends to be better when you're reading in print than when you're listening auditorily. Listening can be very enjoyable, but it's more of a passive activity.
That's interesting that you make that distinction, because that's also something that Michael picked up on. But his thinking was possibly that if listening is sort of easier and less taxing, then maybe it frees up other mental resources for you to concentrate more on what you're listening to, because you don't have to sort of use the parts of your brain that are involved in figuring out the words and what they mean. You can actually get more out of it. So I wonder what you make of that.
The point that Michael raises about freeing up your mind to do something typically turns out to be free up your mind to multitask when you are listening to an audiobook. And it is without a doubt true, and we have all kinds of evidence of this, that people are far more likely to be multitasking when they're listening to an audiobook than when they're reading in print. The next point is there's a huge amount of research that goes back probably 70 years now on multitasking, and it's not the case that for the vast majority of things we do, we can successfully put the same amount of mental effort into two things at the same time as if we put that effort into one thing. So yes, the mind is free, but free for what?
Yeah, probably free to, I think in Michael's case, do the gardening, or think about what in my case, think about what you're going to have for lunch or something, probably that you're not paying attention to the book as much.
And there are lots of other differences. Another of them is mind wandering. How often when you're reading in print, as opposed to when you're listening to something on an audiobook, is your mind going somewhere else other than those words in whichever format they came? Again, there's research that suggests we're much more likely to mind wander when we are listening auditorily than when we're reading in print. And I think that's in part because the print is physically there. It's something to focus on. The audio is, you hear people talk all the time and you don't necessarily listen carefully to what they're saying. And I think it's the same. Well, for this conversation, for sure.
I mean, I'm sure that many people will have had the experience where you read a page or possibly multiple pages of a book and you just think, hang on a minute, I haven't taken any of that in, and you have to go back and you read it again. Is that also playing a role? Because maybe if you're listening to an audiobook, you just think, oh, I missed that, or you're not even really aware that you've missed it, and you just think, oh, it's fine. You don't really rewind it and listen back to it, even though you could.
So even if you could is a really interesting point. We know that it's far more common to reread in print than it is to go back and rewind, however you talk about it with digital or tape technology, to go back and re-listen to something. But there's also rereading in the small, by which I mean, if you look at how the eyes normally move when they read, they move forward and then they jump from one line to another, but they also move backward. It's known as a backward saccade, a backward jump, as it were, from the French. And of the normal kind of reading we do, somewhere between 10 to 15% of our eye movements are moving back, just in normal old reading. So we're used to doing even small amounts of rereading when we're reading print. We don't take that opportunity when we are listening.
That's fascinating. So is what you're saying that even though when we read words on a screen or on a page, it feels like the words are sort of trickling into our brains one by one sequentially, that actually our eyes are kind of moving around the page and we're sort of taking in words simultaneously from different parts of the page at once and going a little bit ahead, going a little bit backwards, and then we're sort of extracting meaning from it in a way that feels sort of linear to us.
Yes, so let's distinguish between the page and the line. And the reading specialists tell us that in the normal process of reading, our eyes always look ahead some number of words. It's called a forward saccade. So you think you're looking at one word at a time when you're reading, but the better readers don't do that. They take in more of the line going forward to anticipate what this word might mean. When it comes to the page issue, I'm glad you brought that up, because with print, and even with the digital book, for example, or digital text, you have a fair amount of real estate to look at. And with the book, you've got two sides of the book. You've got, the left-hand side and the right-hand side. So you can look at lots of stuff to backtrack, to figure out, did I understand that? Do I want to go back and read it again? That was a really good sentence that I remember from 2 pages back. Let me go back and look at it again and see if I have that exactly right. We don't do any of that when we're listening auditorily.
You're listening to Crowd Science from the BBC World Service, where we're looking at the difference between how our brains process books when we're reading them or listening to them. So the evidence shows that as far as comprehension and information retention goes, reading is the clear winner over listening. Our brains are working much harder when we read, going back over words or passages, and importantly, thinking and reflecting about what we've just absorbed. And that mental effort means that written things stick better in the mind.
It was dark, very dark. But as he looked ahead, he could see in the distance there was a sort of light. And he could hear something too. It was like a singing. And as he got closer, he could see that it was a young girl dancing in the belly of the whale. And on each of the girl's fingers and on each of her toes, there were strings that were attached to the inside of the whale. And when the girl danced quickly, the whale skimmed through the water very, very fast. And when she danced slowly, the whale slowed down too.
But of course, we don't read or listen to stories simply because we want to retain the information within them. Back at the Storytellers event in New Haven, I asked 2 people in the audience, Patrick and Hazel, why they'd bothered coming out when they could just be at home listening to an audiobook.
I think it's the personal contact. The reaction between a storyteller and the listener is very dynamic because the teller can alter the tone of voice or
Plus. Tuesday at 9:30 and 20 GMT. Or listen now wherever you get your podcasts. In 30 minutes, Outlook with Emily Webb.
The Vietnamese grandmother fighting for the victims of Agent
All right,
Orange.
last bit of
Trent O'Neill
driving.
was a resistance member who was sprayed with the toxic substance during the Vietnam War. Decades later, she wants justice for her family and the millions of others affected.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
This week on People Fixing the World from the BBC World Service, we're talking about a problem that affects millions of people across the world: period poverty. We'll meet the women working to reduce the inequality and stigma surrounding menstruation. From Lebanon, we'll hear about a network of volunteers sewing reusable pads.
We've got some students here who are making reusable sanitary pads, and it's so exciting to see how confident and excited they are and how chatty they are about periods. I think it's amazing.
A design project to wash pads.
To jest niezwykle ważne, aby pokazać.
Bund und Ländern beraten.
Telefoniert. Danach sagte er, eine längere Waffenruhe wäre zu begrüßen, um weitere Geiseln aus dem Gazastreifen frei.
Słuchacie Metal Life Radio. Metalowy głos w Twoim domu.
Stein, vergiftet
vom eigenen Weib. Jeder hier lebte und bis dann ins Glas hörst du den Schnitter, er geigt. Alle schlafen hier, schlafen auf dem Hügel, hoffen, dass man sie besucht, seufzen mit dem Wind. Wenn sie ausgeschlafen sind, wachsen ihnen Flügel. Alle schlafen hier, bis sie vergessen sind. Alle schlafen hier, schlafen auf dem Hügel, hoffen, dass man sie besucht, seufzen mit dem Wind. Wenn sie ausgeschlafen sind, wachsen ihnen Flügel. Alle schlafen hier, bis sie vergessen sind. Alle schlafen hier, bis sie vergessen sind.
Hey Maniacs, this is Bellet from Noctem, and you are listening Metal Life Radio. Stay fucking true.
really nice. Alright, see you later.